All right, about time for us to begin. Thank you for being here tonight. Couple of things. Pierre had surgery this afternoon, and the report is it went well, and they should be coming home tomorrow. It was done in Salem, so we'll remember him. Yeah, it was done in Salem. So we want to remember Pierre and Rachel as they're coming back. If you didn't already see, you've got notes there at that corner. One set is for what we're going over tonight. Hopefully all of you read Charles Dickens' Great Expectations in expectation of tonight's lesson. No, you didn't. I'm disappointed. You got notes for Sunday's lesson on the triumphal entry, the king on a borrowed donkey, and then next week's lesson is on Leviticus 12. I thought about combining chapter 12 with 13, but the problem is 13 and 14 go together because they talk about skin diseases. Chapter 12 is very short, just 8 verses, but there is a lot of rich material in there. Why women are sinners and give birth to children. I'm just kidding. If you find that the study is too short for your liking, I highly recommend that you read Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Anybody going to read that? Okay. Man, y'all disappoint me. So you've got notes for tonight, Sunday, and then next Wednesday. I will not be here on March the 1st. That's March the 1st, that Sunday, but Anthony will be here to teach Bible class and preach for me. So I appreciate him doing that. Also got the new book in the mail, the CEO. If you would like a copy, you can see me after class. But all right. So Leviticus chapter 11, clean and unclean animals. Talk to me as we start about what were some of your thoughts, knowledge, impressions about kosher dietary laws in the Old Testament before you started studying this lesson? So I want to make it clear, I am not entertaining ideas you've had since you started studying this particular lesson. I would like to know what kind of information you were working on as you originally came to this subject.
I thought that a lot of it was for health reasons at one point, because, I was hearing that the reason why they didn't eat pork was because of trichinosis.
Trichinosis, yeah. Yeah, I was sold that bill of goods too as I was growing up, and turns out when you actually study it, nope.
It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's not about health at all. And so I feel like I got more misinformation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. What else?
Ask the question again.
What kind of, what were some of your impressions, thoughts, knowledge about the kosher dietary laws in the Old Testament before you started studying this lesson, which you prepared for Leviticus 10? So you're starting with a blank slate anyway. What are some of your, what have you been traditionally taught about kosher laws? That's what I'm really getting at. What have you been traditionally taught about kosher laws over the years?
That you need 2 kitchens.
Okay, need 2 kitchens, yeah. Yeah, if you go to a kosher kitchen, there'll be 2 refrigerators. One is for dairy, one is for meat. You do not mix the 2. If you ask a Jewish deli to fix you a cheeseburger, they will not be doing that. It is based on, I kid you not, the prohibition in Exodus, do not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. That's why they do not combine meat and dairy. Yep. Nope. No combination of meat and dairy. Do not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk.
I don't even think they use the same dishware. You have to have 2 different sets of dishware.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. I can tell you this much, as I love shrimp and bacon and everything else, I would have made a terrible Jew. Just absolutely rotten. Yeah, I was just kind of told that mainly it was for sanitary reasons, but when you get down into the nitty gritty, that's not that's not what's going on at all. And there are a lot more things on the list besides shrimp and bacon. I couldn't have catfish. Catfish was banned. Huge fan of fried catfish. There's a whole bunch of stuff we eat in the South that, wouldn't have been on here. Pork chops and boudin and everything else, crawfish. So we're going to get in, we're going to take a look at some of these things. We're not going to read the whole chapter. It's very lengthy. But we're going to talk about some things. But what I want us to think about as we go through this lesson is the fact that what we eat has a lot to do with our identity. Okay. If you give that even just a little bit of consideration, it's pretty shocking how much food is a part of our identity as people. We group food types basically around what ethnic group it's associated with, right? Okay. We refer to Mexican food and Chinese food and, Middle Eastern food, Greek food, French cuisine, Italian, American cuisine. It's amazing. And it's always been this way. Okay. Food is such a huge part of who we are. I'll share this story. So when I moved up here 3.5 years ago, I was conscious about there might be some things that I was used to eating in the South that I might not be able to get up here. And because I knew that kind of how that worked. I had lived in the South my entire life. And one of the things that I realized that I would not get to have out of the grocery store was instant grits. Now they serve instant grits, but they're the plain kind. They're not the pre-flavored kind. So I have to get my grits elsewhere and fix them up. And they're actually better than what I grew up with. But oddly enough, before I moved up here, I had never had anything but instant grits. That's just what I was used to, instant grits. Now, I got that rice cooker and I still use it almost every morning. I cook my grits the slow way. But there's other types of food that, I love y'all. I'm up here, though, suffering for Jesus, not living back in the South, and there's just certain types of food that I can't get up here. We don't have a Waffle House, and I love me a Waffle House. And so every time I go see my girls, I go eat at Waffle House several times because I love Waffle House. Only in the South. I think the closest Waffle House is Las Vegas. We don't have Whataburger up here. And I have a Whataburger t-shirt that sometimes I wear. And the closest Whataburger, I think, is in Phoenix. And I was looking forward to going to see my mom and going to Tennessee a couple of weeks ago to get Whataburger. And I didn't. And now I'm cranky. My mom likes to taunt me by going and getting Whataburger milkshakes. Nobody knows what Whataburger is up here. In fact, my cousin Mary, hi Mary, she'll be watching soon. So she, for the longest time, thought I was saying Waterburger. And she kept calling them soggy burgers. And I'm like, what do you call them soggy burgers? Well, Waterburger. No. Whata. Like, what a burger. Like, oh, wow, what a burger. Whataburger. I can't help it that we add R's in places where they don't belong in the South. I could go on and on. This is an honest to God rule. I do not eat fried catfish outside of the state of Mississippi or Louisiana. I refuse. They don't know how to make it right. Am I right about that? They don't know how to make it right. They don't know how to make it right. They ain't put seasoning in the cornmeal or nothing. Y'all get me talking about food. One of the best books I read, if you ever heard of Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, he's hilarious. And he's got a book called Food, A Love Story. And it's just basically funny stories about touring the U.S. while he's on his comedy tours and eating in different places. There's different places in the country that, I'm going to eat certain food. I love Navajo fry bread. Okay. I'm not ordering Navajo fry bread in North Carolina. Okay. Other parts of the country, like I love the clam chowder that I can get in the Northeast or in the Pacific Northwest. We don't know how to make clam chowder very well in Mississippi. Lobster rolls. Man, Maine has fantastic lobster rolls. I think West Tennessee has the best pulled pork barbecue in the entire country, right? The barbecue up here is just totally sketch. I'm sorry. I'll go to Baldy's occasionally. It's okay, but it ain't what I'm used to. Food is such a huge part of who we are. Okay. And God, with these laws, instead of trying to find a reason for the laws in terms of, oh, well, it was because of sanitation or whatever, a lot of it was simply making them distinct. And the other part of it was helping them to think about how all of their life should be lived in holiness before the Lord. Now, I want to make something very clear. Remember that Jesus declared all foods clean in the Gospels. That is something that the Gospel writers are very clear about. He declared all foods clean. Mark 7, Matthew 15, it's not what goes into you that defiles you, but it's what comes out of you that defiles you. And then you have the story in Acts 10, where Peter has the dream of all the animals that are unclean in the bed sheet. This voice from heaven, commands him, rise, kill, and eat. And he's like, these are unclean animals. And God said, don't you dare call unclean what I've called clean. I was debating on whether or not to mention this, but I actually watched a sermon by Joel Osteen, probably 12, 15 years ago. And of all the things that he won't take a stand on, sorry, Joel, one thing that he did take a stand on was he was teaching to his church, and this is the huge mega church in Houston. And by the way, there's a huge Cajun seafood chain called Papa Do's in Texas. You know about Papa Do's. And it's based in Houston. And in this sermon at this mega church in Houston, Joel Osteen's talking about how that, Christians shouldn't eat shrimp or bacon because these are God's laws. And one, I'm thinking, you're a crummy theologian and Bible scholar. And number two, half your congregation is going to leave and go to Papa Do's and eat, shrimp bruschetta. All right, this bacon-wrapped shrimp. You ever had that bacon-wrapped shrimp? Yes. And I'm thinking about crawfish and shrimp etouffee. And John and I are going to go to Zydeco after class tonight. I thought to myself, why in the world are you taking a stand on this when the New Testament's clear we don't live by this? But as we've seen in Leviticus, that doesn't mean that these passages aren't worth studying, because there are some principles here that I want us to see. So let's dive into the lesson together. There's a shift. Excuse me. There is a shift in chapter 11 where, for the first time, God is speaking to both Moses and Aaron. This phrase is going to appear only in chapters 11 through 15. We are entering a third major unit of Leviticus. So if you were to outline Leviticus, you've got Leviticus chapters 1 through 7, which were the sacrifices and everything related to the sacrifices. You have chapters 8, 9, and 10 that had to do with the ordination of the priesthood and inaugurating all of that. And so when we finished chapter 10 last week, we closed the second major section of Leviticus. Chapters 11 through 15 are going to deal with holiness, cleanliness, purity laws, kosher, okay? Chapter 12 is going to be about a woman in impurity and childbirth. Chapters 13 and 14 are going to deal with skin diseases. We get to chapter 16, that's the Day of Atonement, and chapter 17 talks about regulations related to blood. And chapters 16 and 17 are kind of the heart of Leviticus. Chapters 18 through 20 are going to deal with a lot of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. A lot of it is centered around chapter 19, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. And then from chapter 21 on, it deals with some other things, festivals and the like, other commandments. But chapter 11 through 15 is the third major unit of Leviticus. Another way to think about it, there are three major units in Leviticus, and then you come to 16 and 17, which are the heart of the entire book. And then there will be three major units after chapter 17. Okay. So if you think about 3, heart, 3. That's kind of how Leviticus is divided up. So we're in this third major section, and the last major section before. Think of 16 and 17 as not only the heart of the book, but also kind of like an intermission where we pause, we get our bearings. So we're entering into this third session here. The priests were responsible for teaching these kosher laws to the people, so they had to know exactly what was going on. So verses 3 through 8 deals with land animals. These would have been the animals that the people dealt with the most. I always thought it was odd that there's a lot of it said about sea creatures when they're going to be in the wilderness for a We'll get to the sea animals here in a minute. But land animals obviously are going to be a big part of their diet. Now, filed under things that may only interest me. The Israelites and most other cultures, the average person did not eat meat on a regular basis, purely because of the expense. We live in a wonderful world in which we can have meat at every meal. I remember in 2012, I was touring Alaska on a photo trip and was in Wrangell, St. Elias. And there was a couple there from either Sweden or Switzerland. And I've never been able to remember which one, but it was one of those countries, Switzerland or Sweden. They were a younger couple about my age, and we kind of palled around for a couple of days while we were all there. It was a very tiny little mining village, and there was no roads in it, barely. We were out in the bush. We were eating in the little village restaurant one night, and I asked them, I said, y'all been touring the U.S. and Canada for at least a month now. I said, what are some things you've noticed about our culture that's very different from yours? I'm always fascinated by other people from other countries and learning from them. And he said, well, one, y'all are really political. This was 2012, so we were right in the middle of a presidential election. I'm like, well, that figures. But he said, but then the wife said, y'all eat meat all the time. And I thought that was a little odd. And I said, what do you mean? She said, in our country, she said, we are very solidly middle class. But we can only afford to eat meat once or twice a week. She said chicken is $16 a pound U.S. in our country. And then this was 14 years ago. Okay. And so, and I started thinking, I expect meat and a potato in some form at just about every meal, whether it's a ham sandwich and a bag of potato chips, or it's a, hamburger steak and mashed potatoes, or hash browns and sausage or bacon, or, we eat meat a lot, those of us at least that are godly. The average Israelite did not eat meat on a regular basis simply because of the expense, okay? Primarily at the major festivals. And so they did eat meat, but it was not regular simply because they could not afford to do so. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, let's talk about some of the rules. The rule is straightforward. Any animal that has a completely divided hoof and chews the cud may be eaten. Both characteristics are required. An animal possessing only one of these characteristics is unclean. Some examples are given to illustrate the boundary. Camel chews its cud, but it doesn't have a fully divided hoof, so it's unclean. A pad of tissue on the bottom prevents complete separation, so camels were unclean to eat. The rock badger and the hare appear to chew the cud. Their jaws move in a grinding motion, but they lack divided hooves. The pig has the hoof, but does not chew the cud. Each animal meets one criterion, but fails the other. The lesson is clear. Partial conformity is not enough. And again, why this particular criteria? The text does not tell us. People have proposed hygienic reasons. Pigs carrying parasites, but there's other clean animals that happen to carry parasites. Okay, cows can have parasites. Beef can make you sick, just like pork can, just in a different way. Others have suggested that the distinction set Israel apart from surrounding cultures where pigs were sometimes offered to underworld deities or associated with rituals for the dead. But see, that has to do with offering pigs as sacrifices, not eating pigs, which is a little bit different here. Still others point to the symbolic integrity of the animals, creatures that fully conform to their category, that is, land animals with proper hooves and proper digestion represent wholeness, while those that blur the categories represent disorder. If I had to pick a concept or belief that has a good bit of, wisdom or truth to it, if I had to pick one reason why I think these rules were given the way they were, it's this: that the kosher laws seem to favor animals that stay in the bounds of created order. Okay, animals have a divided hoof and chew the cud. You've got others out there that need one or the other, but they're blurring the lines, and so we're going to say no to them. And we're going to see this recurring theme with fish. If a fish has scales, in the water, okay, it's good. But catfish is out because it doesn't have scales, right? So let's continue with that idea. The text does make explicit the consequences. Israel must not eat the flesh of these animals or touch their carcasses. prohibition extended beyond diet to contact. An animal who stumbled upon a dead pig became ceremonially unclean, and even if he had no intent, had no intention of eating it. Water creatures, verses 9 through 12. The rule for water creatures is similar because it's binary. Anything with anything with fins and scales may be eaten. Anything without them is detestable. Shellfish are out, eels are out, catfish are out. Other creatures lacking the defining features of proper fish were off limits. So it's got to have fins, it's got to have scales. If it doesn't meet that criteria, it's not a legit sea creature to eat. The seas and the rivers teemed with life, but not all of it belonged on Israel's table. Once again, the principle of clear categorization appears operative. A fish is a fish, fins for swimming, scales for covering. Creatures that inhabit the water but lack these features do not fit the category cleanly. Whether the rationale was symbolic, hygienic, or both, the effect was the same. Israel's diet was bounded. Even at the seashore, the covenant followed them. You've got birds and flying insects in verses 13 through 23. Basically, birds that were scavengers were out. Vultures, kites, ravens, owls, hawks, certain kinds of eagles. Identification of some of these species remains uncertain. Zoological vocabulary does not map neatly onto our modern classifications. Sometimes when the Bible refers to vultures, it's referring to eagles and vice versa. That's always been very problematic. Birds that prey on other animals or feed on carrion are prohibited. They consume blood and death, and so Israel was to avoid both. But other birds were obviously fine. Flying insects receive a general prohibition, but obviously locusts, crickets, grasshoppers were okay. That's why John the Baptist is going to eat locust and wild honey, kind of like chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A and dipping sauce. Always find that funny. But yeah, so you have the insects there. Verses 24 through 40, though, let's talk about this. This is kind of the middle section of the chapter. Talks about how uncleanness was contagious. It would spread from dead animals to persons to clothing to objects. Anyone who touches the carcass of an unclean animal becomes unclean until evening. Anyone who carries part of it must wash his clothes and remains unclean until evening. The duration was lifted. The duration was limited, a few hours, not days. But the ritual consequences were real. The unclean person could not enter the sanctuary or participate in sacred meals until the period elapsed. Certain small creatures, moles, mice, various lizards, received special attention. Contact with their carcasses contaminated not only persons, but objects. We can easily understand this for hygienic reasons. Creatures that fell on a wooden utensil, garment, leather article, or a sack, the item had to be immersed in water and remained unclean until evening. If it fell into a clay pot, the pot had to be broken. Clay absorbed impurity in ways that could not be washed out. Ovens and stoves, if contaminated, had to be demolished. The precautions seem extreme until one considers the health implications. Rodents, reptiles carry disease. Clay vessels harbor bacteria in their porous surfaces. Regulations, whatever their symbolic function, also serve to protect Israel from contamination that could spread sickness through a household. Two exceptions softened the rule. Springs and cisterns, which were natural sources of water, remained clean even if a carcass fell into them. The continuous flow or large volume diluted any impurity. Dry seed intended for planting was not contaminated by contact with a carcass. Only wet seed, being prepared for food rather than sowing, became unclean. The distinction's practical: seed in the ground would soon sprout new life, leaving contamination behind. That section there in the middle is very, very important about the contamination concept. Then you have swarming creatures. The chapter concludes with a broad prohibition against all creatures that swarm on the ground: snakes, worms, insects, anything that crawls on its belly or moves on many legs. The language deliberately echoes the curse of the serpent in Genesis. On your belly you shall go. And so that's why you have that. Twice in two verses, the text states the underlying principle: be holy, for I am holy, verses 44 and 45. The food laws are not arbitrary dietary preferences. They are expressions of Israel's identity as God's people. That's the other part that I want us to focus on. is that God is setting his people apart, and their diet is going to reflect them being set apart. I think that trying to find hygienic reasons for all of these laws detracts a little bit from, no, I want to make you a specific people, okay? I want you to stand out. I want you to be different from the nations around you. And one of the ways we're going to observe this is kosher laws. The food, again, food laws were not arbitrary dietary preferences. They were expressions of Israel's identity. Every meal became a reminder of election. Every act of abstaining from forbidden food was an act of allegiance. You're going to find that this is a line that gets crossed significantly during the days of the Greek oppression under Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay, the Hellenization of Judaism that we talked about in our intertestamental class. This is where kosher laws became a big dividing line, and that leads to them being such a big deal in the first century. If you remember, we talked about kind of the four major ways that the four major things you had to show adherence to in order to be considered a faithful Jew. One is observing the Sabbath. Two is observing kosher laws. Three is circumcision. And four is paying the temple tax. These are the four things that are unequivocal in first century Judaism in terms of you've got to do these four things in order to be considered a Jew in good standing by the religious police, if you will. And so kosher laws become a big deal as you go farther into the end of the Old Testament story and the New Testament as a whole. Verses 46 and 47, the chapter ends with a summary that names its purpose: to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. These were not burdensome restrictions, but gracious reminders. They could not eat without remembering that they were chosen. They could not touch a dead animal without recalling that they served a living God. The boundaries around their diet were boundaries of identity. Clean and unclean, permitted and forbidden. These distinctions wove holiness into the fabric of ordinary life, sanctifying every meal and marking every day as a belonging to the Lord. Again, when you followed these regulations, it set you apart as, oh, you must be a Jew because this is what you do and don't eat. And maintaining that identity, that was very critical in God's mind. Okay. The importance of the kosher laws were not in the actual rules themselves in terms of, oh, you're going to live longer if you only eat beef and not pork. Okay. That's the whole, well, some is sanitary and some is not. That's not the issue. The issue was getting them into rhythms of behavior on the daily. I mean, food is so basic to who we are, so elementary to who we are. And by following these laws, they got into the rhythm of we are the people of God. And so if there's only one thing I can impress upon y'all tonight with this lesson, it's this. The kosher laws existed to help them form an identity and get them into a regular daily rhythm of reminding themselves, this is who we are. This is who we are. This is who we are. Every time they prepared a menu, every time they prepared a meal, every time they took a bite, it was to be a reminder that they belong to the Lord. They're the Lord's people, and as a result, this is why they do and don't eat certain things. Does that make sense to everybody? This had to do with identity, not necessarily sanitation. Some of this did have sanitary logic behind it, but other of these laws don't have, to our knowledge anyway, any kind of sanitary connection versus others. It's about identity. It's about getting into the rhythm of your day and having these things that mark you off as special. Comments or questions about any of this before we dive into application?
Now, part of the what makes chapter 11 the break, I guess, is because you're going from the Levitical priesthood, and now it's getting. I think this is one of the reasons why they're addressing Aaron and Moses both, because it's how do the people, they're going to the temple, they're watching the priesthood do all these ceremonial things. How do you take this holiness that the priests have And then how do you apply it to regular people? And I think that's why the break is here.
Yes. So the first application point that I want to talk about was this idea that holiness follows us home from worship. This idea that it's not enough to give God what he wants on Sunday morning between the hours of 11 and noon, that our entire lives are meant to be holy. Certainly there are not restrictions on what we can and can't eat today like there were in the Old Testament. But the Apostle Paul did encourage us to present our bodies as a living sacrifice in Romans 12:1 and 2, that we not be conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of our minds. And what we eat and what we drink and the daily choices that we make about other things and other arenas of life, these things are very important. The God who meets us in worship also follows us home and expects to find his people living distinct lives there as well. And so the daily choices that we make and the regular rhythms of our life should set us apart and identify us to outsiders as that person clearly belongs to the Lord. That person clearly identifies as a child of God. And there are going to be some parts of that mean more to some people than others, okay? But I think it's important that from time to time we take an inventory of daily rhythm, daily habits, and ask ourselves, is this something that would identify me to outsiders as someone who belongs to God? Or am I guilty of blurring the lines? Okay. Again, I'm not really thinking about in terms of food and drink because, Paul and Christ addressed that in the New Testament. But the way that we live our life and the habits that we have and choices that we make, this passage does inspire us and encourage us to take a look at those regular rhythms, those regular habits, and ask the question, does this set me off as one who belongs to the Lord? Or does it blur the lines when it comes to guessing my spiritual identity? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I think that this passage encourages us in that regard. Comments or questions on that? Great lead in, Linda. Thank you.
So I have a note here because obviously Jesus broke down that wall that separated the Israelites from the Gentiles, which was the dietary laws, and he broke that down. But so the note I have here is now, with Christ, the holiness flows outward from the heart because it's transforming every task into worship. And so I guess that it's not, the diet doesn't do that. It's what comes out from inside. Yeah.
And that leads us to the second point, and it's this, that partial obedience is still disobedience. You think about this idea of, the camels, choose the cud so I can eat it. Well, no, it lacks a divided hoof. Okay. A pig has a divided hoof, but doesn't chew the cud. You had to make sure the animal fit all the criteria. Extrapolating that principle, it extends well beyond diet. It extends to how we follow Jesus in our discipleship. We cannot obey the commands that we find convenient and ignore the ones that we find costly. We cannot love our neighbors while refusing to forgive our enemies. We cannot honor God with our lips while our hearts remain far from him. I'm thinking about Matthew 23:23, where Jesus condemned the religious leaders for tithing spices out of their spice cabinet, dill, mint, and cumin, and yet you have neglected the weightier measures of the law, justice, love, and faithfulness. God calls us to be wholly obedient, not just half measures. Okay? There is a strong tendency in every Christian, I will go to my grave saying this, in every Christian there is a strong temptation to emphasize the sins as being a big deal, the ones you don't struggle with. And the sins that you do struggle with, it's not that bad. I think that's one of the devil's most common tactics with Christians. And we have to understand that God wants our whole obedience. I've done reading over the years about blind spots that people have in their life. I've got blind spots. You've got blind spots. It's helpful for us to spend time reflecting on what blind spots do I have, okay? Because we all have them. And, we don't want to be like the religious leaders where we're so, tithing our spices from our spice cabinet. And yet we're not loving people. We're not faithful people. We're not just people, okay? And we obviously want to avoid that. Number 3, what we consume shapes who we become. Israel's diet was not arbitrary. It was formational. By eating certain foods and refusing others, they rehearsed their identity as God's set-apart people. This principle translates directly into the New Covenant. Paul asked the Corinthians, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? What we take into ourselves, not only food, but media, relationships, ideas, these things shape our character and our spiritual health. Christians are not bound by Levitical dietary laws, but we are called to discernment. Not everything permissible is beneficial. The freedom that Christ gives us is not licensed to consume whatever the culture offers, but wisdom to choose what builds up the temple. So I remember growing up, and Philippians 4:8 got, mentioned a lot to teenagers. Finally, brethren, whatever is pure, good, honest, of good report, think on these things. And that meant stop listening to rock and roll, and you can't watch any movie over PG, and, a bunch of other stuff. Music, movies, though those were the big ones, guarding, the entertainment that you absorbed. And that's a pretty good, I don't know that that's really that bad of a thing to warn people about the music they listen to. And, it's kind of funny now. There's seemingly nothing wrong with listening to AC/DC now because it's just classic rock and Ozzy. But apparently 40 years ago, if you listen to it, you're going to hell. It's just we've kind of sanitized it a little bit over 40 years. It's hilarious to me. And Kid Rock is suddenly this bastion of Christian example and headlining an all-American halftime. Anyway, don't get me started. The same people that fed me Philippians 4:8 growing up are the ones that I'm now having to have that conversation with them because they're watching way too much cable news that is rotting them from the inside. Stop. And they're consuming social media without any discernment whatsoever. I saw it on the internet. It must be true. Oh, for heaven's sake. And there's so many times I wanted to throw my head against a brick wall and think to myself, we've all taken stupid pills. Well, I saw it on the internet. It must be true. I saw it on Fox News. It must be true. Jiminy Cricket. Stop. No. And it's just getting worse. All the fake stuff out there, it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I'm barely on Facebook anymore except to post content for other people. And one of the reasons is, my feed just got overrun by stuff that was so demonstrably fake. At some point, Facebook figured out I love the Dallas Cowboys, and so it's feeding me all of this fake news Dallas Cowboys stuff that's just, it's patently not true. It's it's offensive how untrue it is. I'm like, that's not happening. It'll claim that former Dallas Cowboy players passed away, and it's this big sob story. And I'm sitting there going, I literally have never heard of him. He's not even real. I don't even think that's a real person, let alone did they never play for the Dallas. There is so much fake junk out there now. And we ought to be a people that are very critical about what we consume. And what I learned eventually is we'll crack down on the stuff that deep down inside, we don't think people should be consuming that kind of media simply because it's not our favorite type of media. I knew a lot of parents in the 80s that were cracking on their children for listening to, heavy rock and roll, where it was all drugs and, sexual fornication. They had no problem listening to country music, which was about alcohol and divorce. And you're thinking to yourself, pray, what is the difference? It's just that you like country music, but you hate the sound of rock and roll. And so that's why you're telling your kids you can't listen to it. one of the greatest ways, in my opinion, to grow in your holiness, to grow in your set apartness, is to be incredibly critical about the media you are consuming and less concerned with what everybody else is consuming. And I'm telling you, take a long look at the stuff you seem to consume the most, because you get so used to it, you get so desensitized to it, and then one day, God, please, we wake up and we hear something being said on our favorite channel, and we're like, that's not godly at all. My Lord, that's not a swear, that's a prayer. My Lord, no. And so I want to encourage you to think about that sort of thing. Again, the freedom that Christ gives us is not licensed to consume whatever the culture offers, but wisdom to choose what builds up the temple. Finally, a distinction is the shape of holiness. Twice the chapter grounds its regulations in God's own character. Be holy, for I am holy. Holiness means separation, not isolation from the world, but distinction within it. God distinguished light from darkness, sea from land, Israel from the nations. His people were to embody the same principle by distinguishing clean from unclean at their tables. In a culture that celebrates blending in, the call to distinction feels countercultural, but it always has. Peter applied the same language to the church. You are a chosen people, or a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Christians are called to live differently, not for the sake of being odd, but for the sake of reflecting the character of the God who chose them. I want to close with just an example of this main principle. I talked about my trip to Tennessee got canceled and decided to float down to California on a little mini getaway to get out of town and kind of rest from recording way too many podcasts. And what happened was I came back with a great idea for 2 new podcasts. Michael may not be doing this right. No, one, I called the Salt and Light Lab. And my mother and my cousin Mary both think I'm a weirdo because they know I hate science and why I called it a lab. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to make it up to the science gods here. I hated labs all my life, and now I'm calling it a Salt and Light Lab. But what I've endeavored to do in this podcast, it's a weekly podcast, comes out on Tuesdays. It's geared towards teenagers and young adults, but I think that middle-aged adults like myself can get a lot out of it. But what I endeavor to do is, I'm talking about how we live as Christians counterculturally. That's not always easy to do. It's not even easy to know how to do that. But the first episode, I talked about algorithms and social media feeds and how they quickly start to control you. And I talked about how to maybe get to a place where you're not allowing social media feeds to control your life. You're not spending so much time on social media. And it wasn't, I don't want you to be on social media. That really wasn't the point. It was learning to not let them have control over you. Because, man, they can become very controlling. In this latest episode that posted yesterday, I talked about what it means to love your neighbor and the outrage culture that we live in. Read a book recently called Unoffendable, and it was written for Christians, and it talked about how the Christians are the most offendable people in the world. And I'm sorry, but I had to agree. If we are not careful, we can become the most offendable people in the world. Always offended about something. We have seemingly baptized rage and anger, and we feel like it's okay to be outraged about everything. The day after the Super Bowl, I posted a sarcastic status that said, borrowing the line about the Masters, a tradition like any other, hating on the halftime show. Every year, the day after the Super Bowl, Christians of every stripe start posting, absolutely they plaster their outrage about how outrageous the Super Bowl halftime show was. The most secular, most watched event in America had a secular halftime show that did not embody godly principles and values. In other news, you need oxygen to breathe. I mean, I'm not applauding or approving a halftime show, but I keep wondering to myself, why are we so outraged when it's like it's so predictable? And so I keep coming back to this question for myself, and I hope that you'll start asking this question. What does it mean to live counterculturally? What does it mean to live set apart? What does it mean to live in a way that people notice they're different? And sometimes they're going to notice how you're different. It's going to annoy them, even though it's a good way in which you're different. If you're not the kind of person that gets outraged over things that another person thinks you should get outraged over, they will cause problems for you. I can testify to that. Part of being a good Christian, apparently for some people, is being outraged about certain things. And if you're not outraged about them, then you need to grow in your holiness. Don't understand that, but that's their mantra. What in your life is keeping you from being more set apart? Now, I'm not talking about being a weirdo just to be a weirdo. Sometimes people wear being different as a badge of honor, and they go way too far. They just want to be obnoxious. Okay. But where in your spiritual walk do you have room to grow and mature in embracing this set apart identity? Here's what I know. In the first century, Christians stuck out like sore thumbs. The odd thing was, it wasn't because they were known as hateful, outraged, easily offendable people. They were known as people that didn't go along with the culture just to get along. They didn't go to the orgies. They didn't go to the big lavish dinner parties of the trade guilds. They didn't offer, sacrifices to the emperor. There were a lot of things that marked them as different. But one thing that could never be laid at their feet was they're not very loving people. We have surviving correspondence from the early centuries of Christianity in which the enemies of Christians made the comment, they're awfully loving, they're awfully caring, they take care of their own, they take care of the poor and the disenfranchised, and bizarrely the letter ends with, we should kill them. And so as we think about this chapter, it should not be a conversation of what we can and can't eat. I'm sorry, preaching on this chapter and then telling you that you can't go eat shrimp and bacon is spiritual malpractice. But I think it's an important opportunity for us to think about the daily practices that I have, the habits, the hobbies, the things that I do, the things that I say, the things I engage in. Do they identify me as someone who is set apart? Beware the Christian that talks an awful lot about living a certain way and the do's and the don'ts. And they pride themselves on being a gatekeeper in making sure that they can identify who's in and who's out because they're not following their own little rules like things you shouldn't watch and things you shouldn't listen to and all that. Beware that person that they don't have their own habits and hobbies that are killing their soul. But it's because it's stuff they like. They're not going to say anything about it. They're more concerned with what you're doing than what they're doing. That may be blurring the line on their distinction and their set apartness, their holiness. As you think about those things, I can't make that list for you. Okay? There are people that can watch cable news a good amount, and it honestly has no effect on them. They're good, kind people, goes in one ear and out the other. They don't really get upset about it. There are other people, I'm sitting there going, you can't ever watch cable news again. I'm begging you. If you want to go to heaven, do not ever watch cable news again. It is rotting you from the inside so fast. There are some people that don't need to be listening to rock music. And there are certain people that don't need to be watching PG-13 movies or rated R movies or whatever else. People have to decide that for themselves and be discerning. I know that the older I get, the more I realize there's just certain types of media I can't handle. Not a good idea. Nope, 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 nope. You know, time in my life I would have said, well, that's just being legalistic, or that's just telling me I just can't go have any fun. Now I'm realizing that for me, there are some things I have no business consuming. Just not healthy. I don't want any part of that. I don't want to go back down that road anymore. It's different for different people. But I can promise you, the more rigorous you are in asking these questions of yourself and thinking through the things that make up the daily rhythm of your life, it's an excellent way to grow in your holiness and your set apartness, in you being perceived as belonging to the Lord. And that's really what's most important out of this chapter. All right? Let's close in a word of prayer. We'll pick up chapter 12 next week. Father, there are so many things in this life, in this world, that so easily sneak in and become part of our daily rhythms, become a part of our regular affections, become a part of our activities and our hobbies and our passions. And not all of them are good. Father, I pray that you will help us become far less concerned with what everybody else is doing, and for us to take a good, honest look at ourselves and ask the question, where could I stand to grow in my holiness? Are there people that I'm hating that are different from me, and I'm coming up with all kinds of wonderful reasons why it's okay to hate them? But it's mainly just because I just don't like them. I feel threatened by them. Am I addicted? Am I addicted to outrage? Am I addicted to anger because it makes me feel better about myself? Certain types of media that I'm consuming, that it makes me feel pleasure, but I know it's also dragging me a little bit farther away from you. Am I too focused on what everybody else is doing when it really just has to do with my own personal preferences, and I'm becoming blind to the ways in which I'm drifting farther from your heart, and the lines are being blurred when it comes to setting myself apart as your child? Father, I pray that you help us take a long look inward. I pray that you will, in patience, in mercy, but in a deliberate way, you will identify those things in our life where we could stand to grow in our holiness. Because ultimately, we want to be more like Jesus in everything that we say and everything that we do. We want to be a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, that we can declare the praises of you who has called us out of darkness and into your marvelous light. We ask that you'll do all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.